brothers and my sisters, good morning. And it's great to be here with you as we celebrate the Lord's Day and also as we celebrate and recognize the mission work of Lord Carey. To your pastor, Dr. Buck, to all of the associate ministers with us, to all of the officers of grace, thank you for all that you have done and all that you continue to do through and with Lord Carey. It is because of a church and congregation such as yours that have allowed Lord Carey to serve well over 100 years to places where people least expect us to be. When people think mission, they think mainly about Anglo churches. They risk all to go, and indeed they do. But we are right standing shoulder to shoulder. The Lord Carey Foreign Mission Society is indeed the premier and the largest mission community of people of color. And for that we are grateful. And we thank God that He has called us at such a time as this to give leadership to a vibrant, thriving mission society all across the world. I covered your prayers. I covered your support as together we walk alongside of our mission partners in well over 24 countries around the world. Again, on behalf of Lord Carey Worldwide, thank you, Grace. Thank you, Pastor Buck, for your leadership as we move into the years that God have allowed us to serve. To this wonderful music ministry, thank you so much. Thank you so much for ushering us into worship. I'd like to, for the moments that we have left with us, to share with you a very simple Sunday school lesson. If you've been in Sunday school at all, you would have stumbled across this passage that we find in the Gospel of Christ according to St. Luke. It was wonderfully read a moment ago, that speaks about the rich man and Lazarus. I like to use that Sunday school text and preach from the theme, if we were to add a theme to this. Something very simple, something very, very simple. How you look is what you see. How you look is what you see. Hilary Bynn penned an article some years ago, and he started off by saying that today, in this century where we live now, we have over 6 billion members of the human family that share this planet called Earth. A human family that is more interdependent than at any other time in the history of the world. A family that for the first time has the capacity to make sure that every one of its members is lifted out of poverty. In plain English, Ben is saying that we have enough resources in the world family today than ever before in the history of mankind. Enough to lift every one of us out of poverty. He goes on to say that what people want and need is just not enough food to eat, or water to drink, or roof over their heads, or job, or school for the children. But for the most part, what most of us desire is a chance to live in peace, without violence and without war. An opportunity for all of us to realize our God-given potential. He defines development such as that. He talks about the vulnerable of the world. He talks about the fact that we each need to come to the aid of one another as we try to alleviate poverty. Poverty is defined by a young man by the name of Adebayo from the nation of Ghana. He defined poverty. He said, poverty is like heat. You cannot see it. You can only feel it. To know poverty, you have to go through it. Poverty, you can't see it. He says it's like heat. You can only feel it. To understand poverty, you have to go through it. So how can we respond? How can the Church of God, how can Lord Harry respond to the cries of those who are feeling poverty? The gospel writer Luke helps us in framing our response to this. Luke, unlike all of the other gospels, Matthew, Mark, and John, did not write for a mass of people. Luke did not write for a particular congregation, so to speak. The Bible tells us that Luke was writing for a gentleman by the name of Theophilus, a Gentile Christian of some means. Luke's gospel seeks to inform those of us who are on the outside of the Jewish community that we too are welcome to reap the benefits of being part of God's family. Luke invites those of us who are sitting on the periphery of life, those on the outside looking in, those desiring but haven't been denied. He invites us to enter into relationship with God. Luke lets us know that even though we are not part of the 12 tribes, we are not part of those who are considered to be seed of Abraham, yet Jesus' death on Calvary's cross welcomes us into this unique fellowship of believers. Luke therefore wrote his gospel using the lenses of non-Jews. His gospel characterized a joyful tone, provides us with details of how Christ is interested in our humanity, how Christ cares for the poor, the sick, women, children, the marginalized. Luke lets us know that somehow the more we read the Bible, we are discovering that the Bible says a great deal about the poor. The Bible talks a great deal about the marginalized. The Bible talks about the widows and the orphan. The Bible talks a great deal about people struggling for basic survival. But it's a kind of strange phenomenon that while the Bible speaks a lot about the poor, it is the non-poor that seeks to interpret the Bible for the poor. It seems to Luke that while the Bible puts emphasis on those living on the periphery of life, those in the valley and the shadow of death, but it seems to Luke that people who sit at the table in purple and fine linen are the ones who have interpreted the Bible. And so while the Bible pays attention to the poor, the church pays attention to the rich. So for the most part, when we talk about the poor, we like to talk about Matthew's understanding of the poor. Because to deal with Luke's understanding of the poor is to feel poverty. But we soon quickly run to Matthew that talks about being poor in spirit. All of us can ascribe to being poor in spirit, but Luke put a sting in the gospel and he says that Christ is also concerned. Christ is equally concerned, not just about your spiritual poverty, but Christ walks with us. He talks with us, and he tells us that I feel your pain. The more we press this kind of logic that the church has done, you see, the less threatening the Bible becomes. The more we spiritualize everything, the less threatening the Bible becomes. Because all of us are lacking spiritually. As long as the Bible deals with us on a spiritual level, we can all rejoice and declare what a glorious day it is. But when Luke invites us to sit at the gate with the beggar, we become uneasy and uncomfortable. But Luke invites us to take a close look. He invites us to take a closer look at this parable and rediscover what Jesus meant when he told this story. I said this was a very simple Sunday school lesson, and I hope it stays that way. Because usually when we read this parable, we tend to place the value, the premium on the issues of wealth versus poverty. Hell versus heaven. But Doc, the more I read this lesson, I have come to discover that this text is not so concerned about the rich man or even Lazarus as this text is concerned about me. Nowhere in this text does it suggest that rich people will end up in hell and poor people will end up in heaven. This text is not about rich versus poor, but rather this text reminds me, and I hope it reminds you, that we could all end up in hell for doing nothing. That we could all, including me. I'm speaking to myself, I'm preaching to myself. This text is concerned with me. And reminds me that I could end up in hell for doing absolutely nothing. Luke turns up the fire a little bit, and he says to me, you don't have a choice to be neutral in this matter. Luke forces me to take sides. He punches me. You can't afford to be neutral in this situation. It reminds me of a story told. Desmond Tutu was in London, and the BBC was interviewing him, and they were talking about the apartheid situation in Southern Africa at the time. And the question was asked about what he felt for these superpowers taking a back seat on the issue of injustice being inflicted upon black people in the black-owned country. And Tutu made the analogy of, he said, if you watch an elephant with its foot on the tail of a mouse, if you saw an elephant with its foot on the tail, you with me, on a mouse, and you declare neutrality, he says that the mouse does not appreciate your neutrality. Every now and then, the Bible forces us to take sides. The Bible does not give us a pass. The Bible solicits a response. You see, the church has always, and to some extent, continued to place ourselves at the gate and identify as the poor. Now, English is not my first language, so let me make sure we understand each other. The church, to a large extent, continues to place herself at the gate and identify not with, but as the, I understand those two words in English mean two different things, with and as. The church continues to sit at the gate and identify not with, but as the poor, as the outcast, as the downtrodden, as the least, the last, the left out. We have developed a theology of convenience and created a God who sides only with the poor. We take on the posture of the victims because somehow we have created this notion that God is a God for the poor and the marginalized only. This is an easy position to take. Because with this mistaken notion of God, we then shift the responsibility of caring and sharing to those who sit at the table dressed in purple and fine linen. The church, for some strange reason, has taken residence at the gate, waiting for the God who sides with the poor to intercede and liberate us from our misery. I come by to remind myself that both of these notions are wrong. God is not a God of just the poor and the marginalized. Rather, God is the God of justice. And if the church wants to be on God's side, we have to be on the side of justice. The personification of God in Christ, we learn in John 3:16 say that God, for the purpose of bringing humanity into safe harbor, emptied himself in the person of Jesus Christ and died for all of humanity. Jesus declared in the Gospel of John, if I be lifted up from the earth, I'll draw all unto me. I'll draw the poor. I'll draw the rich. I'll draw the blacks, the white, the Jews, the Gentile, the male, the female. I'll draw all of humanity unto me, because I am the God of justice, who have heard the cries of my creation and have come down to restore right relationship and fellowship with all people. The second wrong notion is that the church is at the gate. Yeah, historically, the early church was at the gate, fighting for recognition and survival. They were the marginalized and they suffered persecution. They existed in constant fear, always looking over their shoulder. Church history teaches us that the early church suffered. The church was bruised. The church was killed because of their belief. While it is true that there are churches even today that still meet at the gate, meaning that there are parts of our world today where the church still cannot worship in freedom. I have to say that for the most part, and especially here in these United States, that the church changed address a long time ago. We're no longer at the gate, my friends. And that's something we need to celebrate. We are no longer at the gate. The church now is at the table. We are dressed in fine linen. When you talk about tempering your temperature from winter to summer, summer to winter. You're no longer at the gate. Come on, Reverend. Here is the truth. There is nothing wrong with being at the table. Come on, Reverend. Say it. Don't be ashamed to celebrate the goodness of God. If God placed you at the table, celebrate the goodness of God. There is nothing wrong with being dressed in purple and fine linen. There is nothing wrong with eating well and feeding. There's nothing wrong with it. But when you arrive at the table, just remember to leave the gate unlocked. When you get at the table, remember that, but for the grace of God, once I was at the gate, now God has brought me to the table. I therefore will commit myself that no one, Lazarus or Martha, will find themselves at the gate, because I'm going to destroy the gate so that all men and women will come and feast at the table of God. The story of the Good Samaritan illustrates the fact that Jesus himself reminds the church that we are at the table. Yeah. I'm not making this stuff up. You see, it was not the church that was in the ditch. It was not the church that was suffering and struggling and crying for survival. No, but it was the church who had the opportunity in the person of the priest and the Levite. Who saw an opportunity and did absolutely nothing. You see, the rich man was not accused of being bad. Nor was the rich man condemned for his wealth. There is no indication in Luke's passage to suggest that he possessed his riches through corrupt means. Nothing negative is said about this rich man, and to his credit, he allowed Lazarus to remain at his gate. But here lies the problem. He did nothing to change Lazarus' circumstances. He created no opportunity to move Lazarus from being where he was to where he needed to be. His commitment to Lazarus was limited to crumbs intended for his garbage. The rich man's sin was his mere indifference to humanity. Most of us, my friends, most of us would rather not know. Most of us. Have you ever missed a church member? And after a long while, you meet them in the grocery store. And you say, oh, I miss you in church. And she said, well, I've been sick. And you respond, I didn't know. Most of us, Reverend, most of us make it our business not to know. We make it our business not to know. And I can understand that, because to know invites you to do something. To know. invite you, deacon, to do something. Even if it's just a telephone call to know. Makes you make the telephone call to know. Makes you make the visit to know. Makes you pray to know, invite you to do something. So for most of us, we rather not know. Because to know is added responsibility. I wonder what will happen to those young women in Ethiopia if Lakari decided not to know. I wonder what will happen to those young boys and girls in South Africa who have been declared vagrant by the government. But Lakari is now trying to train them, to send them back into society. What will happen to them if we decided not to know? What will happen to my own brothers and sisters in Liberia if Lakari decides that we don't want to know? And what will happen to Lakari if Grace decides that we don't want to know? Lakari is able to respond because Grace has made it her business to know. And you're one of our highest givers because you have made that pledge to know. Yes, it becomes expensive, but you are willing to know. That's right. This rich man didn't see Lazarus as a person, but a problem. He didn't see Lazarus' situation as an opportunity to do good, but he saw it as an obstacle to his convenience. He didn't see Lazarus as a mission field, but a menace to society. How you look is what you see. Like the Hebrew children in captivity in Babylon, somehow the church continues to hang our harps on willow trees. In the meantime, people are dying of hunger and thirst. Young women are still dying in childbirth. People in this day and age are still dying because of AIDS, when we have enough medication to keep them save lives. It's really a mistaken notion to think that Jesus was only interested in saving our souls just to go to heaven. Jesus broke into human history to declare that he came to initiate a new kingdom. A new understanding of what it was to be called children of God. And that's why in teaching his disciples how to pray, he said, pray that thy kingdom come. In other words, that God will rule us even here on earth, because when your kingdom come, O Lord, your will be done on earth. The kingdom which Jesus initiated is a new social order. An order that lets us care for one another. An order that let us break through the political system and speak truth to power. I always declare that if our welfare mothers and sisters and aunts and grandmothers were to sit around the table and craft out the policies, it would be different. But just like Luke says that while the poor is highlighted in the Gospels, the non-poor interprets the gospel for us. And so our marginalized brothers and sisters are at the whim of those who sit around the table and have no understanding of the kinds of things that they go through. You see, for them, poverty is living in a broken down house, whereas poverty is something that is within. It's something that we feel, it's something that we think, it's something that we dream, it's something that has formed and defined us. And you can put us in a brand new apartment, but all we do is dress up poverty. Come on, Reverend. Until justice rolls down like water, poverty will live on. Until we respect each other's humanity, poverty continues. For the church must break through injustice and declare that all of us are equal in the sight of God. So the question we must ask ourselves is, what is Jesus asking me to do? What's in this parable? Where am I in this parable? Am I at the gate or am I at the table? Whichever side you decide to take this morning, it solicits a response. It solicits a response. I pray somehow that God will take the scales off your eyes so that you will recognize that God has positioned you for such a time as this. God continues to put the church at the table so that we will continue to be good, to lift up those who are fallen in our society, to reach across the oceans of the world and bring peace, bring love, and bring grace. We need to understand what suffering really is. But it all depends on how you're looking. I still remember the year was 1991. And the few years prior to 91, there was a deathly, bloody, senseless civil war in Liberia. To the extent that anyone who could get out, got out. It was a devastating war that caused over 200,000 lives and a population of 4.2 million people. And I had the occasion to go back as part of an official delegation from the Baptist World Alliance. We had gone back to try to negotiate with the military government at the time to take back some of our mission schools that had been overrun by the rebels. And we had been at Executive Mansion, our White House in comparison to yours. And I had wonderful, fruitful conversations. And I really felt good about myself. And I made my way from the presidential palace and made my way down to my local church. And as we stood on the side of the church, right outside of the sanctuary, and having a casual conversation, a young boy, no more than the age of 14, approached the group of us that were having this conversation. And he said to me, "Sir, could you give me some money to buy something to eat?"